This is the story of an American election, but also of something we don't usually find in American history: the violent overthrow of a democratically elected government. The Democratic and Republican parties of 1898 in many ways occupied opposite parts of the political spectrum than they do today.
Most African Americans were voting for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party was white voters almost exclusively. White supremacy was the central focus of the platform for the Democratic Party.
At a rally just before the election, Alfred Moore Waddell provoked the crowds. He said, "Negro office holding ought at once and forever be brought to an end, even if we have to choke the current of the Cape Fear River with carcasses." The votes were counted, and the Democrats won.
Democratic candidates won every seat they had a candidate up for election in.
But some local fusionist politicians remained in power because their seats hadn't been up for re-election, like the white Republican mayor and the Board of Aldermen. And of course, the election did nothing to undo the economic power black folks held in the city. The Democrats had won the election, but their goal of total white supremacist control remained out of reach.
And so they engineered what was essentially a coup d'etat.
The day after the election, at a gathering for white men in Wilmington, the Democrats unveiled a document called the White Declaration of Independence. It contained an ultimatum. Cynthia Brown, whose descendants were in Wilmington back in 1898, is a historian at her church where there's a preserved copy of the Declaration from the next day's newspaper.
"We will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin."
They would strip black men of voting rights. They would give white men a large part of the employment heretofore given to black men. And as for Alex Manly, "We demand that he leave this city forever within 24 hours. The next morning, hundreds of white men marched to the offices of the Daily Record. Manly was gone. He had fled to save his own life. They set the Daily Record building on fire. This is where it once stood.
Once the white leadership destroyed Alex Manly's printing press, they destroyed one way in which the African American community in Wilmington could organize itself and keep itself informed.
At City Hall, the mayor and Board of Aldermen were forced out.
There's 200 armed men in City Hall at the time. They didn't do it of their own free will. And as they resigned, a new member selected by the Democratic Party was voted into office.
Waddell, who once threatened to fill the Cape Fear River with black bodies, was the new mayor of Wilmington. Meanwhile, the mob had grown to about 2,000 men, and the violence spilled into the streets. In these photos, X's mark where the first black residents were killed.
The stories are that they were dumped into the river, and there are varying stories about how many people were killed.
I see 40 to 60 clearly as fatalities as a result of the violence, but I think it was higher.
Many black residents hid for days in the swamps and the wooded cemeteries in the city, including Cynthia's great-grandmother. And thousands of other residents fled Wilmington, never to return. Shortly afterward, Democrats printed booklets celebrating a glorious victory, and in the newspapers depicted black residents as the instigators.
This image is a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened during 1898. You know, what you see is African American men with guns, not white men with machine guns.
The city never regained its black majority population. Jim Crow laws like literacy tests and poll taxes that prevented black people from voting were immediately enacted, and Wilmington's spirit of black opportunity was crushed. Black political representation in the state was over. It would be 90 years until North Carolina elected its next black congressman.